Hey everyone, it is your friend, Joseph Craven, here for another episode of The Numbers Game. That's right, statistics do lie, people lie, the ball don't lie. But we're still going to look at statistics, so whatever. You may ask at this point, this is the, what is this, the fourth time that I've done a Numbers Game episode. I do this every week just to look at the hard stats. No real opinions. You want opinions, that's what other episodes are there for, obviously. But the Numbers Game is, primarily there as a way to catch up on the actual numbers and statistics that go through, that drive what it is we're doing. And the reason I say this is because for as great as opinion may be, as great as, debate may be, at the end of the day, football, sports, they're all games of numbers. And it's because of that my favorite sports website to visit is sportsreference.com. And that's where I get all my information, so I don't really have what you would call go-to blogs or anything. It's not really my personal style. I love the numbers, and I want to stay abreast of the numbers, and that's why I wanted to do the Numbers Game every week, and that's why I do it. It's Tuesday. We got new numbers coming out of week 4, so let's talk about those just a little bit. First and foremost, let's look at the actual score line. Coming out of week 4, number 2 Georgia was able to hold off Missouri 43-29 in Columbia, Missouri. Very, very interesting game there. Ole Miss defeated Kent State 38-17. Number 22 Texas A&M able to put up a fight for a little bit against Alabama, but Alabama outlasts them as they tend to do. Number 1 Alabama 45, number 22 A&M 23. South Carolina defeated Vanderbilt 37-14. Number 6 LSU defeated La Tech 38-21 in a game that was a little bit closer for a while there than people expected it to be. Kentucky defeated number 14 Mississippi State to continue to 4-0. That's 28-7 was that final score. Florida beat Tennessee 47-21, and Auburn defeated Arkansas 34-3. That's number 9 Auburn, at least at the time. Let's look at the polls. No real change in the first 4 in the polls on either AP or coaches poll. What that means is that Alabama's number 1 in both. Georgia, number 2 in the AP, number 3 in the coaches. LSU saw a small jump up after Oklahoma went to overtime against Army. LSU's now number 5 in the AP poll, number 6 in the coaches poll. Going down a little bit, Auburn has dropped down to number 10 in the AP, but risen to number 10 in the coaches poll. So, go figure on that one. Kentucky has entered the top 25 poll finally after defeating Mississippi State. They went all the way up to number 17 in both polls. Mississippi State able to hold on to a top 25 ranking, all in all, to round out the SEC. In the AP, they dropped 9 spots to number 23. In the coaches poll, only dropped 5 spots to number 19. Texas A&M spent a little bit of time in the top 25, but dropped down and out after their loss. However, they're still receiving votes. Other SEC teams receiving votes. In the AP poll, Texas A&M, as mentioned, South Carolina received 31 votes, Florida 29 votes, Missouri received 7 votes, Ole Miss received 7 votes. And on the other side in the coaches poll, South Carolina received 52 votes, Texas A&M 29 votes, Missouri 14, and that is it for the coaches poll. So there you go. Not the biggest shakeup, of course, being in the top 25 polls, the Kentucky defeat of Mississippi State that jumped them up into the top 20 and dumped Mississippi State down several rankings. Let's look at the stats from each game. Number 2, Georgia, of course, defeated Missouri 43-29. Jake Fromm went 13-23 for 260 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, averaging 11 yards per completion. On the other side, Drew Lock went 23-48 for 221 yards, 1 interception, but oddly enough did have 22 rushing yards and a touchdown on 5 attempts. Missouri getting all of their touchdowns on the ground instead of through the air, which is very interesting. Georgia, on the other end, did not have a rushing touchdown. Elijah Holyfield had 90 yards on 14 carries. DeAndre Swift, 71 yards on 16 carries. And those are the only notable rushers for the Georgia Bulldogs. Riley Ridley had 87 yards and 1 touchdown. His older brother, of course, had to outdo him in the NFL the next day. But a solid performance from Ridley, 5 receptions That's 17.4 yards per reception. Mecole Hardman had 2 catches for 60 yards and a touchdown. And the lone reception for Jeremiah Holloman for Georgia went 61 yards to the house. Those were the 3 receiving touchdowns for the Bulldogs. In case you're wondering where the other points came from for Georgia, Rodrigo Blankenship had a 44-yard field goal, a 21-yard field goal, and a 40-yard field goal towards the end of the game. But to start things off, it actually was Tyson Campbell who recovered a fumble and went 64 yards to the house to get the first touchdown of the game for the Georgia Bulldogs. Eric Stokes had a blocked punt that went into the end zone for a touchdown for Georgia as well. As far as rushing and receiving goes for the Missouri Tigers, it was a very, very, very balanced rushing attack. Demaria Crockett carried the ball 13 times for 67 yards and a touchdown. Tyler Beatty had 11 carries for 50 yards and 1 touchdown. And Larry Roundtree III, who had a very good game in the week before, carried the ball 8 times for 33 yards and a touchdown. And we mentioned Drew Lock had 5 carries for 22 yards and 1 touchdown. So the big-time pocket passer actually carrying the ball pretty well. The leading receiver for the Tigers was Albert Akwugbunam. I'm pretty sure I've mispronounced that tremendously, but it's a fascinating name. The tight end, the 6'5", 255-pound tight end, by the way, big dude, had 9 receptions for 81 yards. Behind him was Jonathan Johnson of the Tigers with 4 catches and 51 yards. But Missouri's passing attack was just not quite the same as it has been expected to be so far this year. Not quite the same way. Georgia was able to really defend the passing game for the Tigers very well. Ole Miss defeated Kent State 38-17 in a game that had so many weather delays, it felt like it was never going to end. And when you have that many weather delays in a game, it's just going to be an ugly game. So the numbers are not always going to be amazing to look at, and you really can't take much away. But let's look at these numbers right now. In particular, for Jordan Ta'amu, he went for 442 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception on 28 of 38 passing, 11.6 yards per pass, per completion there. Scotty Phillips went back to having another very good outing. He had 19 attempts on the ground, 112 yards, and 1 touchdown. That's a 5.9-yard average, helping him out. And freshman Tylen Knight from Pearl, Mississippi, just wee little 5'6", 171-pound guy, had 6 attempts, 10.3 yards per carry, 62 yards on the day. A couple other touchdowns were scored on the ground by Isaiah Woolard and Jordan Ta'amu, but neither of them had notable rushing stats. Woolard only had 16 yards, and Ta'amu netted 0 yards. Receiver DK Metcalf received 5 catches for 102 yards and a touchdown. A.J. Brown got the bulk of the receptions, 7 of them for 96 yards. DeMarcus Lodge came in behind him with 6 receptions for 81 yards. And Dawson Knox, the tight end that sometimes gets overlooked, also had 79 receiving yards on 2 catches. But oddly enough, the other passing touchdown here went to running back Scotty Phillips. He actually had 44 receiving yards on 2 catches. So spreading the ball out quite nicely were the Rebels. Number 1, Alabama was able to withstand a push from number 22, Texas A&M. Of course, at the end of the first quarter, it's 14-7 A&M. A&M got a field goal to make it 14-10. It was mostly Bama from then on out. But let's look at the stats. In the losing side of things, Kellen Mond went 16 of 33 for 196 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. Nick Starkel also played quarterback for the Aggies, 7 of 11 for 67 yards and nothing in the touchdown or interception category. Kellen Mond ended up rushing the ball the most for the Aggies, outshining their star running back, Trevion Williams. Mond had 18 carries for 98 rushing yards and 1 touchdown, showing his legs, one of his biggest strengths as a quarterback. Trevion Williams only carried the ball 8 times and only for 31 yards. For the winning side, Tua Tagovailoa went 22 of 30 for 387 yards and 4 touchdowns, averaging 12.9 yards per reception. Jalen Hurts came in, threw the ball 3 times for 9.3 yards per reception, 28 yards on those 3 completions. It was Damian Harris and Najee Harris who carried the ball for the most part. 8 carries for Najee Harris and 43 yards, 7 for Damian Harris and 52 yards. The 2 rushing touchdowns scored by the Tide, however, went to Josh Jacobs, a junior running back, who carried the ball 6 times for 11 yards and 1 touchdown, and Tua Tagovailoa had 1 rushing touchdown. On 4 carries, he got 10 yards total. Through the air, pretty spread out as far as yards go. Henry Ruggs III had 84 yards and 1 touchdown on 3 receptions. Jerry Jeudy, 78 yards on 6 receptions. Irv Smith Jr., a tight end for the Crimson Tide, had 74 yards on 4 receptions. Devonta Smith had 56 yards and 1 touchdown on 4 receptions. Damian Harris had 2 receptions for 48 yards. And it was 6'5", 254-pound tight end Hale Hintges, interesting last name, who had 2 touchdowns. His 2 catches for 29 yards both went for 6. Another strong performance from the Tide to prove that they are the number 1 team in the country. South Carolina defeated Vanderbilt 37-14. For Vanderbilt, quarterback Kyle Shermer went 18 of 38 for 180 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. We also got to see sophomore quarterback Mo Hassan come into the game, throw 2 passes, only complete 1 of them for 12 yards. The Commodores didn't have a huge amount going on the rushing front. Sophomore running back Jamari Wakefield had 14 carries for 72 yards, a nice 5-yard average. But their go-to back so far in the year, Keyshawn Vaughn, only had 9 carries for 30 yards. He did have 1 touchdown, but that was a 3-yard per carry average. Mo Hassan rushed the ball twice for 26 yards, but beyond that, not a huge amount of rushing offense for the Commodores. Khalija Lipscomb, the wide receiver for Vanderbilt, had led the way with 9 receptions, 72 yards, 1 touchdown. Their go-to tight end, Jared Pinkney, had 4 receptions for 42 yards, but no more touchdowns for the Commodores there. On the other side, though, South Carolina quarterback Jake Bentley went 19 of 28 for 261 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Rico Dowdle led the way for the Gamecocks, 20 carries for 112 yards and a touchdown. Running back A.J. Turner had 9 carries for 64 yards, and Tyson Williams behind him, 7 carries for 48 yards and 1 touchdown. Jake Bentley, the quarterback, rushed the ball 9 times for 45 yards as well. Star receiver Deebo Samuel saw the most amount of targets, 7 receptions for 56 yards for him. However, leading the way in terms of yardage was wide receiver Shee Smith, who caught 5 passes for 119 yards and a touchdown. So South Carolina really carried by standout individual performances between Smith and Dowdle. Number 6 LSU, now number 5 LSU in the AP poll, good for them, is 4-0, defeating La Tech 38-21. In this game, Joe Burrow went 16 of 28 for 191 yards, nothing in the touchdown or interception department to talk about. It was a classic LSU rushing attack. Breakout star Nick Brossette carried the ball 23 times for 78 yards and 3 touchdowns. Kind of makes you wish there was college fantasy football for you to have him in. But it was Clyde Edwards-Helaire who actually led the team in yards. On 20 carries, he carried the ball for 136 yards, 2 touchdowns there. Obviously, the Tigers not throwing the ball tremendously, but wide receiver D. Anderson did get 5 receptions for 80 yards to lead them right there. Of course, it was in the 4th quarter, let's look at the box score, in which LSU and La Tech were at 24-21. La Tech got a 42-yard pass from Jamar Smith in order to bring the game a little bit closer. But Nick Brossette got his 3rd touchdown of the day later in the game with 8 minutes to go to make it 31-21. It just seemed like from then on out, LSU was able to pound the ball, drain the clock, got another touchdown after that, and it was all Tigers there. Another undefeated SEC team are the Kentucky Wildcats, breaking in the top 25. They defeated Mississippi State 28-7 on a gross rainy day up there in Lexington, Kentucky. On the losing side, quarterback Nick Fitzgerald completed 16 of 32 passes for 145 yards on an interception on the day, no touchdowns for Fitzgerald. Senior running back Aries Williams carried the ball 8 times for 22 yards. Nick Fitzgerald 16 times for 20 yards, the lone touchdown for the Bulldogs. Kylan Hill, the sophomore stud, only 4 rushing attempts for 14 yards. Obviously, Kentucky not letting the Mississippi State running game get anywhere. Through the air, it was wide receiver Osiris Mitchell, tall dude, 6'5", who had 6 receptions for 65 yards. Stephen Guidry had 2 receptions for 36 yards. But again, behind them, not a whole lot through the air as well. Kylan Hill did have 3 receptions for 19 yards, and it was the tight end Justin Johnson with 2 receptions, 13 yards. No one else had any receptions for a double-digit yardage. Wildcat quarterback Terry Wilson only attempted 14 passes, completing 8 of them for 71 yards, 1 touchdown. Of course, the star of the game, as he will be for Kentucky in every game, is running back Benny Snell Jr., 25 rushing attempts, 165 yards, and that impressive 4 touchdown performance. 2 of those touchdowns coming in the fourth quarter to ice the victory for the Wildcats. 3-1 Florida were able to defeat 2-2 rivals Tennessee 47-21 in a game that was very heavily Florida for basically the entire time. Tennessee getting their points late in the third and the fourth, kind of in what you would call garbage time. Jarrett Guantano completed 7 of 18 passes for 164 yards, 2 interceptions though. Keller Chris saw quite a bit of playing time in this one, 3 of 7 for 44 yards. On the ground, Ty Chandler carried the ball 19 times for 66 yards. Madre London 11 times, also for 66 yards, 1 touchdown. Behind them, Jeremy Banks came in for 8 carries, 25 yards, and the other rushing touchdown. Nothing necessarily noteworthy in the passing department, or the receiving department, rather. Marquez Callaway had 2 receptions for 61 yards, so 30 yards per reception is a decent number there. And Juwan Jennings, 4 receptions for 60 yards, the main target for the Volunteers. However, this game was almost entirely Florida Gators. Felipe Franks went 9 of 18 for 172 yards and 3 touchdowns. We also saw a little bit of Kyle Trask in the game. He completed his lone passing attempt for 14 yards. Jordan Scarlett actually saw the ball for what feels like the first time this year. 11 rushing attempts for 77 yards and 1 touchdown. And it was that freshman Damian Pierce, the apparently weight room junkie. Look up some of his weight room stats sometimes if you want. He rushed the ball 7 times for 63 yards and a touchdown. Felipe Franks had 1 touchdown on the day as well. Freddie Swain, through the air, 2 receptions, 88 yards, and a touchdown. And Tyree Cleveland, also 1 receiving touchdown on 2 receptions. He had 43 yards. And then oddly enough, it was R.J. Raymond, a linebacker, who came in and had 1-yard touchdown reception as well. Auburn was able to handle Arkansas 34-3. Ty Story for the Razorbacks went 13 of 31 for 141 yards, 1 interception. Rakeem the Dream Boyd carried the ball 8 times for 66 yards. Story also added 12 rushing attempts for 44 yards. Devwell Whaley only had 26 rushing yards on 8 attempts. And through the air, not a whole lot to talk about here. A couple of players had 2 receptions, but for the most part, the Arkansas passing game was not able to get anywhere. Passing game, though, for the Auburn Tigers, not really anything noteworthy either. Jarrett Stidham went 15 of 22 for 134 yards. Granted, if you're beating a team that badly off of defense, you're not really going to try to do much on offense. But it was not a very good offensive day for Auburn either. Jatarvius Whitlow had 13 carries for 49 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Cam Martin, 8 attempts for 39 yards as well. Anthony Schwartz had 3 receptions for 59 yards to lead the Tigers. And Ryan Davis led the way with 6 receptions, but for only 40 yards. Not exactly an offensive, powerful offensive game here. The way Auburn was able to score, Whitlow had a 5-yard touchdown run. Anders Carlson a field goal in the first quarter. Jarrett Stidham got a 4-yard touchdown run. And then there was a Connor Limpert 29-yard field goal for Arkansas in the third quarter. Noah Igbinogene That's how I'm going to say it. I don't think it's right. He actually had a 96-yard kickoff return, and then Jarvis Whitlow had his 15-yard touchdown run and another Anders Carlson field goal at the end there to push the score to where it was. All right, let's wrap things up as far as these go by looking at the individual performances. Offensive Player of the Week in the SEC was Alabama quarterback Tua Tagovailoa. Of course, he had almost 400 yards of total offense, 5 touchdowns, completed 73% of his passes, which is really, really impressive. Career highs for completions, attempts, yards, and total touchdowns. On the other side of that was that Kentucky stud linebacker Josh Allen, who had 6 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 1 quarterback sack, 1 pass breakup, and 1 quarterback hurry. He, of course, is the Defensive Player of the Week, if that was not clear. Allen was all just living in the Mississippi State backfield, and he easily earned that Defensive Player of the Week nod. Special Teams Player of the Week, no question, Noah Igbinoghene. His 96-yard kickoff return was the first of his career and the first kickoff return for a touchdown by an Auburn player since 2013. On defense, he actually had 2 tackles and forced a fumble as well. Freshman of the Week, Dameon Pierce, the running back for Florida, scored for the second straight game, a 47-yard touchdown run. He had 63 total yards on 7 carries. He actually is Florida's leading rusher through 4 games, 228 yards on 21 attempts, averaging 10.7 yards per run. The offensive lineman of the week was Gervontius Bunchy Stallings once again, graded at 93% in the victory over Mississippi State, had 4 knockdown blocks, 21 blocks at the point of attack, no penalties, no missed assignments, did not allow a quarterback sack. There were 2 defensive linemen for the week, Isaiah Buggs from Alabama, 7 tackles and 3.5 sacks, 2 quarterback hurries as well, and Javon Kinlaw, defensive tackle from South Carolina, huge effort, 5 tackles, 3 of them for loss, accounting for 21 yards loss, and a pair of sacks for 18 yards, 2 forced fumbles, one of which was directly a return for a touchdown, 1 pass breakup, and a pair of quarterback hurries. Good grief, why do you even have a co-defensive lineman of the week? Kinlaw flat out deserves that nod by himself. But I guess there's probably some sort of rule that says there has to be an Alabama player mentioned there. Ooh, I'm sorry, it wasn't supposed to be opinion in this. That's my bad. And finally, we've got the individual statistical leaders to this point on the season. We're looking at, things such as sack leaders, rushing yard leaders, passing, so on and so forth. So let's go ahead and look at, through the 4 weeks of the season, we'll look at the players that lead the conference right now in all of these statistical categories. First up, the top 5 passers in the SEC. Jordan Ta'amu back on top with 1,359 yards, a 10.9 yard average there. Missouri's Drew Lock is in second place, 1,283 yards. He's got 11 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. Ta'amu, by the way, has 10 touchdowns and 3 interceptions on the year, very similar. Tua Tagovailoa has 1,033 yards, rather. He's got a 72.5% completion percentage, which is very impressive. Tied with Jake Fromm as far as starters in the conference go. The one thing about Tua is that he has attempted half as many passes as Drew Lock and about 45 less attempts than Jordan Ta'amu. In fact, Tua has by far the smallest amount of passes attempted in the top 5 with 80 pass attempts, 58 passes completed. So the fact that he has over 1,000 yards on that is impressive. He's got a 12.9 yard per average going with all of his passes and 12 touchdowns to no interceptions. Kellen Mond of Texas A&M has gone 72 of 122, 1,020 yards, 7 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. And Kyle Shermer is the 5th quarterback in the top 5. He's the only one in the top 5 to not have 1,000 yards yet. However, he does have 934 yards. That's on 77 completions, 130 attempts, 6 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. What's interesting about all this is that once you get past him, when you go into number 6 through all the rest of them, none of the other quarterbacks have over 800 yards passing. Jake Bentley in 6th place has 780 yards passing. So the top 5, as far as passing yardage goes, very, very clear-cut top 5. For the rushing statistics, Benny Snell is on top. He is the top rusher right now. 540 rushing yards and 7 touchdowns. Both of those are going to lead the conference. He also, however, leads the conference in attempts. Nick Brossette is second to him in attempts. We'll get to that in a minute because number 2, as far as rushing yardage goes, is Scotty Phillips of Ole Miss, 467 yards, 5 touchdowns. Travion Williams of Texas A&M is in third place, 430 yards, 4 touchdowns. Nick Brossette of LSU, 409 yards, 5 touchdowns. And Mississippi State's Kylan Hill, despite having not gotten the ball often against Kentucky, still in 5th place with 307 yards and 3 touchdowns on the fewest attempts by far in the top 5. So that's the thing. Benny Snell has 87 attempts. Nick Brossette, 83 attempts. The other 3 rushers in the top 5 have considerably less rushing attempts. Scotty Phillips of Ole Miss has 62. Travion Williams of A&M, 67. Kylan Hill, a mere 36 rushing attempts. Jatarvius Whitlow is in 6th place. He has 57 attempts. So once you keep going down the list, most of the top rushers, or 2 of the top rushers in particular, have obviously also the highest amount of rushing attempts. So while Benny Snell has 540 yards so far in the year, he's got that on 87 attempts. It's still a very, very good 6.2 yard per carry average. You compare that to Nick Brossette, 83 attempts, 409 yards. He has a 4.9 yard per carry average, and which is still good. But in college sports, you really want to have 4.5 to 5 means you're doing well. If you get above 5 is when you're doing very well, and that's what the other players do not. In the top 5, that's what the other players are doing that Brossette and Snell are not. As far as yards per attempt go, Kylan Hill is leading the conference still with 8.5 yards per attempt. And Elijah Holyfield out of Georgia is not in the top 5 as far as rushing yards, but he is 2nd place. He's the other player in the SEC right now averaging over 8 yards per attempt, 8.1. As far as receiving statistics go, Emmanuel Hall of Missouri, 430 yards and 3 touchdowns. He still is top in the conference. He's held that position before, and it looks like at this rate he may continue to hold it. As expected, the Ole Miss duo of A.J. Brown and DK Metcalf come in 2nd and 3rd place. A.J. Brown, 381 yards and 3 touchdowns. DK Metcalf, 368 yards and 4 touchdowns. Along with that, Metcalf has the higher average with 20.4 yards per reception. Brown, 14.7 yards per reception, having the higher volume of receptions. Alabama's Jerry Jeudy comes in 4th place, 365 yards and 6 touchdowns, which leads the conference as far as touchdown receptions go. And Khalija Lipscomb, the Vanderbilt wide receiver, jumps into 5th place. He has 34 receptions to this point in the season, which is a huge amount. 306 yards, 4 touchdowns. It's Vanderbilt's tight end Jared Pinkney, who has dropped out of the top 5, but he's still in 6th place with 283 yards and a single touchdown. In case you're curious, yes, Lipscomb's 34 receptions top the conference as far as total receptions so far. A.J. Brown is 2nd behind him with 26. So Lipscomb has 34 receptions. He has, 8 more receptions than A.J. Brown does to this point in the season. Impressive stuff there. Benny Snell at this point is the leading scorer in the conference with 42 points. That's because he has 7 rushing touchdowns. Tucker McCann of Missouri has 41 points. He's the place kicker. That's how it always is. Place kickers tend to lead in scoring because they're credited both extra points and field goals. So Missouri's place kicker, Tucker McCann, is 41. LSU and Georgia's place kickers, Cole Tracy and Rodrigo Blankenship, have 40 apiece. Jerry Jeudy and Scotty Phillips, wide receiver and running back, are tied with 36 points behind that. And defensive numbers, we have a new sack leader in the SEC. well, at least a new tie. Isaiah Buggs of Alabama, with his 3.5 sack performance last week, is now tied with Mississippi State's Montez Sweat with 5 sacks on the season. 5 sacks in 4 weeks is an impressive number for those two young men. Markel Winters of Ole Miss and Christian Miller of Alabama are both tied with 4 sacks behind them. And then we have a massive tie with players that have 3 sacks behind all of them. So I'm going to read out all the names. These are all the players that have 3 sacks. Right now, Isaiah Buggs, Montez Sweat, Markel Winters, and Christian Miller are the 4 that have set themselves apart. Behind them, you have Armon Watts of Arkansas, DeAndre Walker of UGA, Josh Allen of Kentucky, Kenny Abear of Vanderbilt, Michael Divinity Jr. of LSU, Jabari Zuniga, of Florida. I think I did the same thing last episode. Anthony Jennings of Alabama, Charles Wiley of Ole Miss, and Javon Kinlaw of South Carolina all have 3 sacks apiece. So right now, Buggs and Sweat with 5 sacks, Winters and Miller with 4 sacks, and those are the sack leaders on the season up to this point. 5 players have multiple interceptions, all of them tied with 2 interceptions so far. Here are the guys that we have there. Deontay Thompson of Alabama, DeAndre Baker of Georgia, Rashad Fenton of South Carolina, Greedy Williams of LSU, and Daniel Thomas of Auburn all have multiple interceptions. And that's going to be your individual leaders here in the numbers game. As you can tell, the numbers are starting to tell a very, very interesting story so far on the season. We'll touch base with you again later in this week with more overtime episodes coming out on Running Out the Clock. And with that, a week from today, we will have the Week 5 numbers game. More stories surrounding all of the numbers and statistics in the Southeastern Conference. I'm your friend Joseph Craven. This has been the Numbers Game. Thank you for listening to Running Out the Clock.